Good evening. Tonight I'm going to talk about how you build a brain. And I'm also going to talk about the role that education may or may not play in that. But before I start, I'd like you to please take a moment, turn to someone next to you, and tell them, please, what grades you got on your maturita. Okay, that has to be enough time. You have to have already finished it. Okay, now you can stop. Now I want you to stop. We're losing control of the audience. Okay. Now the reason I asked you to do that is I wanted to remind you of how important that was at one point in your life. And of course, you did the work necessary to presumably get good grades on your maturita, and then you went off to university. And you realized that all that work that you had done to get those good marks on the maturita had contributed nothing to your ability to do well at university. Because doing well at university requires an entirely different set of skills than getting good marks on a test. And in fact, doing well at your career also has nothing to do with that. And you may have found once you began your career that it also had fairly little to do with what you'd studied at university. In fact, the things that we do in school, in conventional school, typically contribute very little to what we need to do, what we need to know, the capabilities that we need to be successful at life. You don't need good marks to do well in the world. What you need is simple. What you need is, you need this. You need this. Yeah, that's what you need. Well, thank you. Good night. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, no, yeah, this is what you need. You need to have a brain that works well. And so you're probably familiar with this kind of an image of the brain. Maybe you've seen an image like this one. Have you ever seen an image like this? Yeah, these are the connections within the brain, right? Okay, so let me show you another picture of the brain. What you're looking at here is actually how the brain matures over from early childhood until adulthood. And the part that's turning blue, that's brain that's maturing and it's becoming functional. And it is through the process of experiences in the environment, experiences in the real world, that the brain builds itself. In fact, you probably know, because you're a sophisticated audience, that brain development is experience dependent. You understand what I mean by that, experience dependent. Not all experiences contribute to the development of the brain. To begin to talk about the kinds of experiences that do help build the brain, I have to show you one more brain picture. Yeah, what is that? This is your brain's version of your body. Okay, how your brain is constructed. The architecture of your brain has a dramatic overrepresentation of the hands. Because in fact, the reason that you have a brain is so that your body can interact, can live in the world. In fact, the reason we evolved a brain was because, well, frankly, anything that moves, that needs to eat or can be eaten, needs to figure out what it's going to do. In order to survive, it needs to know, should I move over there to get that food source? Should I go over there to avoid being eaten? Or should I do something else? In fact, the purpose of the brain is to control behavior. And the brain is controlling the behavior of that guy. Okay, that's how it works. And for the brain to build itself, that guy needs to engage in a certain kind of activity. Now we've just ended the show. How did that happen? Yeah, okay. That guy needs to engage in a certain kind of activity, this kind of activity. And I know it's a lot of words, so I'm going to say it with me, all right? Listen as I say it. That guy needs to engage in motivated, effortful, repeated, trial and error, experimental interactions with the environment. And that's how the brain builds itself. And in fact, it's the only way the brain builds itself. And in fact, if you ever wanted to learn a musical instrument, you had to care enough about learning that musical instrument to stay motivated, to apply the effort, to engage in the, repeated over and over, trial and error, experimental interactions with the environment. Because when we do this kind of activity, it's like barbells for the brain. The brain is a muscle, kind of. And like building any muscle, you've got to exercise it, and you've got to push it as it builds muscle. And that's how you build a brain. There it is again. God help us. Yeah, okay. Okay, so that's what you have to do. You understand what I'm saying, right? Okay. Now, we understand that. I mean, TEDx audience is a sophisticated group of people. If you have children, you're thinking about the kinds of activities. You have an instinct for it. In fact, you're thinking about the kinds of activities that you can have your child do to help them engage in that kind of motivated, effortful, repeated trial and error experimental interaction with the environment. And so you do things like say, yeah, it's a good idea. Participate in the science fair if you do that kind of thing in the Czech Republic, or get involved in doing independent projects. You want them to find things that light them up. And maybe you'll sample different kinds of experiences, and you'll say, yeah, my kid is into this kind of thing, and we're helping him or her experience that kind of stuff. So we like things like science fair, motivation, engagement, working hard on solving problems. A lot of countries, you have things like robot competitions. You have robot competitions in the Czech Republic? Yeah, okay, so, hey, some people like to build robots, some people like to write the software, and so it helps people find out how to do things like work together, to work collaboratively toward a shared goal, to practice being good winners or being good losers, to have practice at those real-world applications of problem solving. Or maybe we send our children to summer camp because we know that there's a whole set of activities that they're going to learn. They're going to learn social skills by interacting with other children in a semi-structured social environment, right? I mean, these are the things they need to learn. And they only learn them when they get to have these experiences. They only build these capabilities as a consequence of practicing them. And even sport, some children are drawn to sports, some children are drawn to art. And as sophisticated, thoughtful parents thinking developmentally, you know that you want to line them up with these kinds of activities. Now here's an example from a Montessori classroom. Here's another example of motivated, effortful, trial and error, experimental interactions with an object in Montessori called the pink tower. He's learning to differentiate by size. This is a sensorial enrichment activity. He's 3.5. He doesn't really distinguish size as well, but when he's doing this kind of activity, he's developing that skill, and he's drawn to it, he's driven to do it. And we don't have time to watch the whole thing here, but is he? If we did, we'd see in about 2.5 minutes he figures it out, and then we could watch him do it again, and he does it in 30 seconds, because he's developed some cognitive capacity as a consequence of practicing this activity. And that's how you build a brain. And I believe that we want to build brains, and I'm pretty sure that we all want to build the brains of all children. And this is how it works. Now, a TEDx audience is probably relatively professional type people for the most part, and we know something about research on families like yours. You are overwhelmingly preoccupied with the cognitive development of your children. So you devote a lot of energy and time to facilitating this process. Energy and time that people from different kinds of backgrounds, and maybe even different understandings, wouldn't be able to. But this is how you build a brain. It's the only way you build a brain. You have to give this guy opportunities to, to do that. That's how you build a brain, and it's the only way you build a brain. And we're wired for this. I mean, it is nature's design that children are drawn to engage in activities that help build their brains. Right now she's learning something about how the natural environment is, and she's noticed she's sitting very nicely. Well, there was a time when she couldn't do that, but her brain was drawn. It's nature's design. She wanted to master that. Now she's practicing the skill development of her fingers. She's refining her senses by experience. And that's how it is for all of us. That's how it always, this is how human beings grow. This is how we build our brains. And if you ask anybody who understands something about brain development, about the maturation of, higher order capabilities, even lower order capabilities, if you ask anybody who knows anything about the brain, what should school be for? They'll say something like this. Because it's self-evident, once you understand what's necessary to build a brain, it becomes self-evident that this is how you should do. This is not how you should, it's the only way you can. What should school be for? It's possible that school could be a place where every child from every background, regardless of the kinds of experiences they're having outside of school, could have experiences in school that help facilitate this process. give every developing brain its best shot to do this. But that's not what school usually is for, is it? And school is usually for, as you know, learning things. And that's okay, because there are things to learn. And I'm a neuropsychologist. Believe me, there's a lot of things that I needed to learn to become a competent neuropsychologist. And it's the same thing in your line of work. Whatever you do, there's things to know. Yeah, so we have to learn material. There is content to know. But when we focus solely on content and forget capabilities, we don't build the brain. And of course, you know how content learning works. It works. Oh, and here's another problem. Because this isn't an environment that's designed to provide children with opportunities to, what is that thing again? Motivated, motivated repeated experiment. Yeah, you can't do that there. I mean, you might have a teacher who has that inclination and tries to, build some of it in, but that's not an environment designed to build a brain. But that's what we do at school, and this is how we evaluate school. We give tests. And if we want to improve school, there's a very superficial logic that says, well, I don't know, if we want to have schools be better, what should we do? Well, children should learn more stuff, right? Because isn't that what school is for, to learn things? And how will we know if school is improving? Well, it's simple. We'll give them tests. And if they know more stuff, as seen on the test, then schools are improving. That's the way we think about school improvement. And of course, Pisa has played a significant role in this. Every 3 years around the world, children take Pisa tests. And then the OECD produces the Pisa ranking tables. Okay, so the part in purple, that's the midpoint. There's the United States. We're not doing so great in math. You see, instantly the mind goes to, oh man, got to get those math scores up. And but we're doing okay in reading. At least we're above the midpoint in reading and science, so maybe we're doing okay. And there's the Czech Republic. And right away, the competition is set up, isn't it? Yeah, man, you're kicking it. You're kicking it in math. But hey, man, we're winning. Sorry, we're winning on reading and science. And so maybe you should get your reading and science game together. Because we're winning. So there. And this spreads all over the world. Every country in the world that wants to improve education is trying to improve performance on tests. Because after all, if school is going to get made better, they're going to know more stuff. And how will we know if they know more stuff? We're going to see improvements on tests. Now, Pasi Solberg, who is formerly with the Finnish Ministry of Education, former teacher, written widely about why Finnish education works so well, even though they don't chase the test scores. He's described this trend as the global education reform movement, and that spells germ. And if you're quick and you know English well, you know what that means. That's what germ is. But there are consequences to chasing the test scores. And believe me, the test scores have real importance in the United States. And one of the consequences is you stop teaching other things, or at least de-emphasize them. In fact, then you especially de-emphasize the kinds of activities that help build the brain, because those things aren't on the test. And everybody gets nervous. Teachers can lose their jobs. Schools can close. Principals can get fired if they're not improving the test scores. So one thing that happens is school becomes unbelievably boring. Now, in an unrelated study, the economic analysis was done, there's never enough funding for education. In this study, they explored what would the consequences be on school performance if you changed from a 5-day to a 4-day school week. You know what the consequence was? Scores went up. Now roll that around in your mind for a moment. What they've done is they've created a situation where you do better if you get less of it. That's what chasing test scores brings you to. Oh, and by the way, PISA, other international tests, analyses have been done. PISA scores predict nothing about the economic future of a country. Once you're out of the bottom quartile, you know what I mean, the bottom 25%, you probably don't want to be there. Okay, there's basic literacy issues perhaps, but once you're out of there, it doesn't really matter how people do on PISA tests. Other factors are far more important in predicting economic development. Google knows this. Google doesn't care how you did on the test. Google used to be famous for doing brain teasers and things like that. They don't do that anymore. You know what predicts performance on the job at Google? Give me an example of a time when you solved an analytically difficult problem. That's a highly predictive interview question. It has to do with this. How do you get a job at Google? You have a well-built brain. That's how you get a job. Ernst & Young has done an analysis of incoming employees. They don't care how you did at university. They want you to have gone to university. They don't care how you did. They don't care about the test scores. They don't predict performance at Ernst & Young. IBM did an international study, interviewed 1,700 CEOs from 68 countries in 18 industries. You know what they want? They want people who can innovate, people who are creative, people who can communicate, people who can collaborate within the company and with customers. They don't care about the test scores. And you know what? Not a single one of those 1,700 CEOs said anything about school performance, because it's not a predictor. Everyone everywhere wants this. This is a distraction. What this does is it drives our attention other places. Now, Czech Republic has not always had national testing, but I know that you're into that kind of thing now. It's not going to improve things. It's going to distract you as a country from the kinds of things that really will have an impact. And this is, here we go, from 2013. This is a education analysis for the Czech Republic. One of the ways the Czech Republic in 2013 decided to improve school performance was to increase more assessment and evaluation in schools, because after all, school's about learning stuff, isn't it? And how do we know if they're learning more stuff? They'll do better on the tests. And so how do we know that they're getting better? Well, we have to give more tests. So that's the fundamental dilemma of the modern age. Is it going to be, God help us. Is it going to be building better brains, or is it going to be participating in germ? That's the dilemma of education in the modern age. Thank you. Some Montessori people here.